how fast will this make you money? So I'm going to go through how fast Raises.com can make you money and how that looks like right now. So how fast will you get a return on investment from setting up and raising capital for your fund roll-up or acquisition here? So we're going to split this video into two parts. First are the amounts, and then next will be the probabilities. So, everyone has a timeline. So this is you now, assuming that, let's say you're barely set up your private placements or you're not ready, and the end timeline is your fund and offering is created and closed. So the truth is, getting everything set up, is always going to take time. It's always going to take cost. And the whole purpose of, at the end of the day, the whole purpose is to make things take less time and take less cost to create value in that delta. So for the setup, that's what we propose. So some of our members, they set up real estate investment trusts and complicated entities. We assist them in lowering potential legal fees. And this is one situation. Perhaps your situation is, maybe you don't have anything like this, but this is more of the complex type of transactions we paper together. So, setup, we often see it could be as high as 20K to 40K to under 10K is really the idea, is to get those setup fees low. And as you've seen in this example, that's really the point, is to make sure we get these things low. So the idea is that the first part of the quote-unquote return on investment is to minimize legal fees where possible. So in a standard way, so the red represents a standard way, you now paying 40K to a securities attorney to set everything up for a complicated transaction. And so that's where the negative is. But then the quote-unquote better way of doing it would be to get those fees underneath 10K as quickly as possible, and to create value in that difference between the red and the blue. And so that the area underneath the two curves, that is what value is. And that's what return on investment is in the first part. So that's the prep phase. But next, there's a raising part of it as well. And for the raising part, investment banks, this is what a standard investment bank would charge, a retainer fee of 25K. In addition, several success fees and everything. So if you look at any mid-market investment bank that is a professional capital raiser that is registered by FINRA, these are some of the standard market rates if you just go out and ask an investment bank to help you for your deal, if they accept you. So I guess the companies like Raises.com, the idea is to get that part underneath 5K to underneath 10K for the raising part as well. And the same story, normally it's 25K or 35K to work with a normal boutique investment bank to work on actually the compliance outreach to investors in situations where it's obviously legal to do so. And you look at the delta, so you can probably replace that by 35 or 25, but the area underneath the two curves on the right, so this is really the difference here, is trying to minimize this as well. And that's the raise phase. So that's just in terms of cost, but what about the probabilities of the deals closing, and how can we look at the ROI in terms of the chance of getting things closed here? So you can also use this strategy. So what I'm about to show you, you can actually also potentially use this when selling your deal to investors, obviously in compliant ways. But you want to really see the arguments that is being made here and use it to your benefit, both in terms of you potentially using this and stealing this argument, and you actually seeing how it makes sense in the context of you using a company like Raises.com to set up and raise for your transaction. So this is the expected value formula. So if people are familiar, this is how multimillionaire investors, like Richard Koch and so on, track their investments. Basically, you look at the probability of a deal closing, or the probability of the value you'd get multiplied by the value you'd get. Like, let's say you have an investment that gives you, $1 million after 5 years. You multiply the percentage chance of that happening by the $1 million. So let's say you have there's a 10% chance of a venture capital investment giving you $1 million. You just multiply that by 10, and then that'll give you, 100,000. So that's what it would be worth. So that's basically the formula in a nutshell, if you're not familiar with the sigma and it looks intimidating. So again, all it is, it's the sum of all the values. So the sum of all the values in the formula multiplied by the chance of the values actually taking place. And so that gives you the expected value. So let's say you make $100 if you flip a coin that lands on heads. So flipping a coin that lands on heads in that case would have an expected value of $50, because there's a 50% chance of the coin landing on heads and giving you $100. So you just multiply $100 times the probability of it happening, then you get $50. Yeah, and again, because the value is 100, and you multiply by the probability, and it's 50. And because there are no other values to add up, that's the only thing there. So the expected value is, it also includes negatives. So, for example, let's say you make $100 if you flip a coin and lands on heads, but you lose $100 if it lands on tails. So what that means is that the expected value will be 0, because so you add everything up. The probability of the thing landing on heads is 50. You get $50, but then the chance of it going on tails is worth negative 50. So because the probability of it landing on tails is 50%, and you multiply 100 times 50%, you get negative 50. But then again, because the chance of it landing on heads, you get $100, multiply that, you get 50, positive 50. But then you add them up. That's what the sigma and the crazy E looks like. You add them up and it nets to 0. So you just have to remember there are some plus and minuses when you look at expected values and chances of things actually taking place in closing. And again, remember, we multiply the probability times the values and then add them up. So let's go back to what we discussed initially. Let's say you're at a red. You work with standard corporate professionals to set up and raise for your private placement offering, and you spend like probably $75K, versus spending let's say $5K or $10K or whatever. Looking at cost-effective firms and setups and done with you methods. So let's just run through that formula. So the cost-effective way, let's say at worst it costs $10K to set up and raise for your deal, versus, and then plus, let's say if your deal closes, you can net at $500,000. So let's say whatever type of transaction you're doing, you make $500,000 if it closes, and let's say that there's a 10% chance of your deal closing, but there's a 100% chance of you paying money to set up the deal and to advertise to investors and to hire salespeople or whatever. So there's a 100% chance of you paying money to get it going, but there's only a 10% chance of you netting $500K in profits after the deal closes. So that would mean that the expected value would be $40K, because we simply multiplied what you lose times the probability, and then we add up what you gain times the probability. And so obviously it's because we're multiplying 10K by 100, we get 10K, there's no difference. And then we multiply 500K by 10%, and then we get 50K. So then you add them up, you get 40K. So that's the expected value if you include the probability of 10% chance of the deal closing. So the standard way, so if you work with the big investment banks, so let's go back to the red. So if you work with the big standard investment banks and professionals and accountants that are normal, and then you set this up, you're guaranteed to pay 75K. And let's say you get the same benefits if the deal closes. And let's say there's still that 10% chance of the deal closing. Then you would get, it's the same story. The only difference is that you're paying more initially. So we're multiplying. There's a 100% chance of you paying, let's say you're paying fund administration software, the typical people, 75K, and plus investment bank, 75K to begin. And there's a 100% chance of you paying that without you guaranteeing that the thing will close. Well, let's say there's a 10% chance of your deal closing and you netting 500K in profits. It's actually negative 25K. And that should be in red, but negative 25K when you add everything up. And yeah, because we just multiplied 100 times this and times that. And so don't take it from me. You can play with these numbers, and this is a standard, pretty basic formula that people use when looking at probabilities. So if you add up the probabilities of your deal closing based on your confidence of working with any professional, just get that value that makes sense for what you're doing. And even if there's a 1% chance that you will raise enough capital within the time frame that you're looking for to get the results that you want, you potentially saved yourself a lot of hassle and time wasted for something that hasn't happened yet. So hopefully this helps bring some clarity into you properly, knowing how to plan out your capital raise.